When I heard about this project first, I thought, oh God, this is going to be kind of weird, you know, like asking people, you know, so are you all afraid of dying? You know, no, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, so, you know, you guys know how to swim or? I suppose neither of us had like a huge understanding of Dutch kind of engineering in terms of flood control and that sort of thing before we came here.
I'm going to be straight up honest. I had no idea that water was an issue here. Just I knew it was below sea level, but I just you know one thing, but you don't actually consider the reality of what that is. It makes you question how people act in society and just the way human beings approach any situation and problems, and like, do they think long term or short term or mid term? And different views of like if you're viewing it in a very scientific or practical way, or if you're viewing it in like more holistic ways, or looking at the cultural aspects, the artistic aspects.
We met so many experts who were all to do with the same topic, but experts in their field and very different from each other.
As you have been noticing, the water is all around in the Dutch landscape, and so it's often also on the minds of artists. There has been a tradition, for example, of depicting the water as a threat, the dangerous sea where the ships are threatened to shipwreck. But I think where the Dutch art history was most famous for is depicting the harmony in the landscape between the land and the water. And you can see people working in it or also having the leisure in the landscape.
I think that's something that always inspires me. People's quirkiness in the face of their particular circumstances. So even the footage of the ice skating and seeing how people have come up with like zany races around cities and jumping over ditches with giant sticks, that's another wacky one. For us, generally, things come back to just the human aspect of things and the human adaptability and the connection with nature, and that provided the backdrop for a lot of the lighter moments as well.
Also, like the simple beauty and peace of being out on the polar. It was like the water was calm and it was very green and there was like windmills and stuff. And it's, again, for me, it just always brings up questions of like how, you know, nature and I suppose life can be so peaceful like that and so savage at the same time. And that's part of the harmony of it, that there has to always be both. Why, in the first place, were people living here and building houses here if it was such a precarious place to live in terms of the water?
When people started to live here, the risk for flooding was zero. In the beginning, there were these peat moors, and they were elevated. It was above sea level. And then, because we reclaimed them, they started to sink. By 1500, this whole coastal region of the Netherlands was at sea level or below it. It's like digging your own grave.
Yeah.
You know, if you're writing a concept electronic album, it's very easy just to approach it from a very analytical point of view, a very literal point of view, you know, so you can take some data or something and you know, transcribe it exactly to generate the music. But equally important for us, I feel, is the kind of the emotional narrative. Yeah, it has to be enjoyable to listen to because nobody reads a great album about, you know, you need to listen to it. And then afterwards, finding out the background information becomes more interesting because you're engaged in it.
Yeah, you can do so much with electronic music, but this was like a very simple process in a way. It was using very basic tools like EQing sounds, reverb, and, you know, and pitching sounds. I think we've both been heading that way in a while, like just simplifying our processes, and Ruida was very the opposite way, whereas we wanted everything to be complex and noisy and as many ideas and as saturated as possible. I think now it's like...
Trying to be honest about it as well.
Being just much more honest in what it is that you're trying to do, what you put out, and more getting to the heart of what the music is and what you're trying to say rather than getting involved in the process and the tools, because that easily happens with electronic music because there's always some new shiny plugin that looks amazing and does crazy things. And it probably does do amazing things, but it's very distracting as well. Yeah, for me it was amazing to come to an archive and have so much material to work with. I think you described it earlier as like having the biggest second-hand record store in the world to play with, to go through and just dig for samples.
It's not like post-production of a film where they're like processed to sound a certain way. Like when you get that nice crackly texture of somebody talking on a radio about something. It's actually because that's how it sounded, and what the person is saying is what was happening in real life. And that influences you as well, I think.
The Netherlands is a low-lying country, as you know. So if about 60% of the Netherlands have the surface which would be flooded if we didn't protect them. For us, it's mainly the river discharges that are important and the water levels on sea. And also connected with that, we have changes in the height of the waves. And these actually are the loads for calculation of our flood defenses.
So what's the general mindset of Dutch people, Dutch public?
Well, most of them don't worry at all, so they are well protected. And actually we're living in one of the safest deltas in the world. On the other hand, actually 1/3 of our primary flood defenses doesn't meet the requirements at the moment. Doesn't mean that tomorrow it will break and we have a big problem. It's like with your car. If it fails to check, you have to do something. We have to try to make our way of flood defense more adaptive.
I wanted to hear some crazy shit about floating cities, or
They're gonna fly
people
in the
living,
back of Wales.
people living in the
Okay,
clouds.
let's get going.
No, it didn't happen.
No.
We used to just demolish the houses when we needed more space for the flood defenses, but it's not accepted anymore.
I suppose people here, when you grow up with it, you're just used to it being like that, and you kind of just take on that spirit of innovation and just accepting that that's the way it is. And so people don't seem that stressed about it, and it's not like they kind of wake up sweating in the middle of the night, from what we gathered. But when we come to it as two outsiders, it's kind of it's so much to take in. It's such a big topic, and also because we kind of come from an island nation ourselves, who are kind of right on the edge of the sea ourselves. It's kind of, you know, could this happen to Ireland as well?
We had this big flood in 1953 in Zeeland. We had about 1,800 people who died because of these floods, and it was a big devastation of the area and big economical damage also. So we started thinking, hydraulic engineers, how we could protect the Netherlands better. So they had mainly two options: reinforcing all the dikes along the estuaries and the rivers, which is quite long, or just shortening the coastline, because then you only have a small length to protect. And that's how we started designing the delta works.
In '54 they started building the first storm surge barrier of the Delta project. And they finished here at Maasland Storm Surge Barrier, actually 1997. So all the way from '54 up to '97, the Netherlands worked on realizing all the several parts of the Delta project.
You know, you look at one way, you look inland and you see all the engineering feats and stuff like that. You think, well, it all seems to be okay here. And then you just turn around and you see the sea and you kind of, you know, you get that sense of scale of like, this is just a massive unknown.
When you listen to them in the track, you don't or I don't think ship horn, but when you listen to the raw sample, it's not changed that much. It's just recontextualized, so you hear it differently. And I really enjoy that ambiguity in sound design. You can take something very recognizable and change it slightly so it still maintains the resonance of what it is, but is something totally different.
This is the Afsluitdijk. This is one of the most famous civil engineering projects of a dike that closes the Zuiderzee, the IJsselmeer.
In a picture like this, you have the really mundane thing like the road, and this really strange, otherworldly landscape. So that kind of thing is immediately kind of evokes kind of sonic and musical ideas. Because music is such an abstract kind of form of expression.
I think in this picture, indeed, you see very beautifully how the water merges with the mist, and the more general shapes of the landscape become more important instead of the specific details in the specific place.
When we were asking about the future and the kind of the threat of the water, and she said that Dutch artists aren't really interested in this question. It's only foreign artists who come here who are always talk about the threat. And she always was like, "You're making me kind of worried with your questions," which I thought was kind of funny.
Kind of
Yeah.
Going through the archive and through the footage and also seeing all the works, we noticed a lot of mechanical rhythms and mechanical sounds and that constant work in the background. And so that kind of found its way sonically onto the album. We're probably both fans of kind of that sort of mechanical sound anyway, and there was so many amazing sounds, so many interesting rhythms as well in it, from little machines that'd be twirling and there might be little cogs and there'd be a certain glitch in a rhythm somewhere, and you're trying to find rhythms within rhythms.
The thing about the barrier, of course, is that we do need power to operate the barrier. And of course, power means risk, because during a storm you can have power failure. That's why we use two power providers. If they both fail, we still have an emergency generator on site. If that fails, then I'm told we can still get the large doors out with a towboat. Might be hard, but seems possible. Now, if that fails, then I would say maybe it's time to pack your bags.
20th century solution to floods is evacuation. So you take out the people by helicopter, or they drive out themselves with buses and cars. But then at some moment, some traffic engineers discovered that doesn't work, because if you want 5 million people in the Randstad to evacuate by car, you get traffic queues for days.
I was talking to Petra. She made an interesting kind of point about how people used to be connected to their surroundings and connected to nature. And people would know when a flood was coming, because the animals would naturally go to higher ground. People would notice that and go, okay, there's a flood on the way, there's a storm coming, and people would move, and they're more empowered themselves to deal with the situation, where now people are so disconnected, it's just somebody else's problem. Someone's going to, create a dam, and someone's going to keep a pump pumping.
I think always you need people who think about and take care about the dike, so they should feel responsible for the flood defense. And actually, that's what I see myself also, but my colleagues, they get emotional when you touch their flood defenses. Not because of the flood defense, but because of the consequences for society.
And there's one particular thing that really stuck with me, and for me kind of framed the whole project, which probably gave it a darker tone in the end, the album a kind of darker tone, was this information that we got when we were at the gates at Rotterdam from Emma, and she said that the water is always rising. It's not even the fact of floods and heavy rains or the sea, but there's groundwater that's always rising in this country, and it has to be constantly pumped out. If those pumps fail, the country floods. It's like the country is being artificially kept alive.
The memory of flood is not very vivid anymore. As it was in the past, every person had witnessed at least one and sometimes two floods in his or her life. So there are several mechanisms in society that contribute to this losing of the contact with the water.
It's going to go back into a struggle at some point. Maybe it won't, but that's just my impression I got. It's just that feeling is that it's a cyclical thing. And I thought maybe there should be a question mark after Emerge on the album Struggle. And Emerge?
Yeah.
For me, it was like full of all these big kind of philosophical questions that I came away with. It was like, how do you deal with this problem? Where is the balance, or where's the reconciliation between man and nature? And you know, is human suffering really that bad a thing in the grander scale? Like when you know, we'll all be gone someday anyway. So it's like
being an artist, it's about being personally attached to these things and questioning things and trying to find answers within your art. You know, even if you don't understand the answer, or even if you get confused,
or there is no answer,
or it's not a clear answer, I think it's just trying to figure out, you know, my human reaction to all these gigantic questions.